All right, hello everyone. Thanks for stopping by this video. And Micah here. I'm talking about vision and just being able to see and better ability to see. And vision impairments, right? I know everybody. A lot of people deal with different vision impairments that could be superseding of this video. And I'm not an ophthalmologist, an optometrist, or anything, or a doctor. Right, there's just a layman's perspective and some personal experience, right? You might have some experience or some more expertise on the topic of vision and your eyes, ocular capabilities than I do. So if you have something you want to correct me, by all means, from a more certified perspective, assuming you do have much more knowledge than I probably do. But just I'm talking about, hey, like what is it that helps you to see better, right? What is it that's impairing your current vision, right? For a lot of us, we experience maybe one of these two things, right? Either farsightedness or nearsightedness, right? Farsightedness, where we can see things at a distance, but we can't really see things very well, as clearly or better, as good, right? Or we're nearsighted, and it's the opposite. We can see things, far. I mean, not near, but we can't see things far very well. I think maybe that's the more prominent one. I'm not sure. Right, and there's different things that can cause these. It's not like just this one concept, but what I'm talking about mostly is the expansion and the contraction of the lenses in the eyes, right? There's other things that can come into play, maybe like the length of your eyeball. I've maybe read a couple of things that it's not the only thing that comes into play. The length of your eyeball and some other factors could come into play. But I'm mainly talking about the contraction and the expansion of the eye, the lens in the eye, in order to see things at different distances. If you're nearsighted, you probably know what it's like to, be able to read a book, but when you're reading a street sign or something like that, it's much more challenging, right? And I think for a lot of us, it's easy to forget that probably one eye is a bit stronger or weaker than the other, right? One of our eyes is better or weaker than the other, and it could be different at different distances. So this is important. In this video, I'm going to probably also talk about a couple of the, or maybe a couple few of exercises that I would say has personally helped me to make some progress, to see some actual changes, some effects, right? Some factors that came into play for better vision, right? To be able to see clearer. And I'm not claiming to have perfect vision, obviously. I'm talking about correcting, vision problems that I've had, vision issues, which mostly I would say is being nearsighted, right? Maybe drop me a line and let me know what your main vision impairments might be. If you're in this video, you're probably coming here because you've had some vision impairments or issues. You're trying to figure out how to maybe improve your vision, right? So I'm going to give you a couple of exercises that I feel like are most important for helping for many people, not for everybody, obviously, and different reasons why you could have it. And you might try some of these exercises and feel like they're not working at first. It's you got to try to really break through. Maybe if like I said, some people might not even be able to make the breakthrough because there's a different cause or something. But I'm talking about mainly the contraction and expansion of your lenses, right? To be able to see something close and then be able to see something far, right? And we might think, oh, it's kind of a conscious thing, but maybe it's a bit more subconscious in some levels than we think, right? It's almost an involuntary muscle, right? We can't just, yeah, sure, we look, we can say, oh, we're seeing close and then we're going to see far, but maybe it still also needs to come into further focus than what we can consciously do. So this is something I found that I feel like seems to be a factor, is that your lenses and differently could take time to adjust to certain distances. Like you might look at something at a distance with, and like I said, this is also another thing too, is like testing one eye over the other, right, for different distances, right? Maybe let me know what your experience is with your eyes, but like for me, if I look up, like when I put my hand or my finger right in front of my face, maybe about a foot away, roughly, right, I can see pretty good with both eyes. But if I close one eye and and look from one eye and the other, I notice that actually my right eye can see more detailed and clearly than my left eye, right? Now, if I move it closer, it's the same thing. The right eye seems to be able to keep it. Now, if I move too close, it gets blurry, right? Either way. But the concept there is which eye seems to have the most clarity at whatever distances, right? Now, if I look at that, now I know that at farther distances, it's my right eye that's not as clear, right? So that kind of makes sense. In this case, you're saying, hey, well, the left eye is better at seeing things far, and the right eye is better at seeing things close, right? But there's also a factor of middle distances. Like if I look at this something about 5 or 6 feet away from me, I've been writing on a bottle. I can read it with my left eye, but my right eye, I can't. So I'm getting a gauge of at least three different distances right there. About a foot in front of my face, about maybe 3 feet in front of my face, and then about 7 feet in front of my face. And then I could even take further distances, like across the room, like 10 or 20 feet or something like that, right? And gauge, which eye is able to see better, right? My left eye seems to be able to see far better, generally speaking, right? Certainly. But then when I get close, my right eye. So I guess that's mostly what it is consistently. You might be different, right? So you have one stronger eye and one weaker eye. And what is making them stronger or weak? Maybe there's a few different things that could come into play, right? Maybe you have slower sensory from your brain to your eyes to your brain than one than the other or something. And who knows? Maybe there's some dietary factors that could be causing some atrophy or myopathy in one eye more than the other, right? There's different factors that come into play. But I think for a lot of times it's kind of like writing with, maybe if you're right-handed, you write with your right hand, you can write. Your left hand, if you were to maybe start writing, if you've never really tried it much before, it might feel like really awkward, right? You're not able to write very well with your left hand, or vice versa. You're left-handed and you're not able to write with your right hand. Maybe you're ambidextrous and you can do pretty well with both hands, right? But I think for most people, if you've been writing with one arm most of your life, like most people are probably right-handed, then to try to the other arm to try to write, it's really awkward, right? Now, the thing is, though, is if you did keep writing as if you only had your left arm all of a sudden, that was the only when like your right arm was broken and you just couldn't use it anymore, or whatever reason, right? God forbid. But if that was to happen and you only had your left arm and you had to learn how to write with it, eventually it would kind of feel like natural, maybe, right? A bit more. You would have practiced so much, you would have done fine practice writing your letters and numbers and stuff like that a bit, gotten to the point where you were pretty good at it, right? Pretty fluid with it. Maybe it doesn't quite ever feel like as if you were right. Maybe your right side of your body is truly more dominant, or at least with your arms, right? Maybe because you notice with me, like I said, I can see farther with my left eye than my right eye, but I am right-handed, so I wouldn't say which way or the other, it's hard to really say. Do they correspond necessarily? Like if, are you right armed, does that mean your right eye is better? I don't know about that, right? So, but there's something to be said for maybe each side of the brain possibly operating certain functions better than the other, like saying that the left is more intellectual and the right is more emotional, or whatever way it is, I probably forget, maybe it's the other way around. But you get the idea. That's a theory that's going around. I don't claim to know exactly how definitive that theory is. Maybe it is pretty definite, pretty true, because I'm not a neurologist or anything like that. But, maybe it is true to say that, one eye is stronger than the other because we don't use it as much, or it gets lazy, right? Maybe my left eye, for whatever reason, you can see this farther, maybe my right eye has gotten lazy for some reason. Where our brain seems to interpret the signal from the clearer eye. When we have both of our eyes open, we're able to get the vision from the better eye and generally interpret it based on that information. But if you had to close your better eye, how much information would you be able to pick up if you were reading a book, or would you be able to read it all clearly? If I'm looking at my computer screen in my right eye, like I can read stuff from this but much further. I have trouble reading that print, right, with my right eye. Where my left eye, I can still read it pretty clearly. I can definitely make out the letters. With my right eye, I can't from that distance. So that's a test to do, right, for yourself, each individual eye, right? But now, as far as some exercises, right, to help improve the weaker eye, but also to maybe improve both eyes, but probably primarily your weaker eye, right? The weaker eye. So kind of like if you were to write with your left arm for a while, just to get it, just for the practice sake. Maybe you don't have to do it because obviously you do it with your right arm more because you're right-handed, or vice versa. But just for the practice sake of getting good with it, right? And I have practiced that a bit, like not a ton, but writing with my left hand. So I can kind of do it, not like great, not super. Like if I had practiced, if I really took it more seriously, maybe it'd be easier for me to do it a bit better. But right now I can feel like kind of a bit of control because of that practice. also playing, being able to do those fine movements and stuff that if I hadn't have practiced, I probably wouldn't feel like that level of control, right? So it is possible to get my left hand to write pretty reasonable, especially if I practiced a lot, made it my main thing to write left-handed. Maybe I could possibly feel more dominant there, much more control than if I didn't practice, right? Didn't practice. Same thing with guitar, right? Playing guitar. If you play guitar right-handed or left-handed, whatever way that you currently play, maybe that's probably your dominant way. Like if you're right-handed, you probably fret with your left hand, right? If you're left-handed, you probably fret with your right hand. That's kind of the general rule. But it's possible you could have learned it backwards and you became good at that, right? But at the same time, if maybe whatever way you did learn, you flip the guitar over, and in that case, the strings would be upside down. But the main point is that you're fretting with the opposite hand and strumming with the other hand, right? So now you're having to learn these different movements, right? That's the main element. So, excuse me, but just saying, hey, that you flip the strings completely upside down or whatever, you've restrung it so it's the same, symmetrical when you put the guitar the other way. That's not the point. The point is, can you fret as well as fluidly with your left hand as you could with your right hand, or vice versa, right? Or strumming. Can you do the strumming effects that are the intricate? Can you do, or does it take you a bit of practice, a lot of practice, because you're so used to strumming with your right arm, and now you have to learn how to strum these complex rhythms with your left hand, right? It might take you quite a bit of practice, right? But if you did, you'd be pretty fluid. You'd be able to, wow, somebody see you could play some music left-handed just as good, or something happened to a finger or something like that. You'd have more options to be able to play, the opposite of what you normally would do, because your dominant hand would normally play the strumming or vice versa, right? So, that's the same thing we want to do with our eyes. Take that one individual eye that's weaker and do some of these different exercises, right? And I'm talking about not like there's a whole bunch of them. I'm talking about mainly one particular exercise for beginning is just to kind of, hold your finger up to kind of close to your face and be able to see it clearly with one eye, see which one eye is the clearest one at closer distances. And maybe try to get the left one or the weaker one to come into some clarity as close to what the stronger eye is doing, right? By closing the one eye at a time. And this takes a little bit of time too to do these, because like I said, your lenses might take time to focus, where I might think, oh, I just can't see at this distance. But if I just sat there for a while and just focused, tried to intentionally focus on something at a distance where it's normally blurry, right? Try to intentionally focus on it a bit, try to get my eye to really focus and but also a level of relaxation as well, intentional relaxation. Maybe trying both approaches, right? An intentional relaxation approach to where you don't try too hard, you just try to gently let your eyes come into focus of what you're seeing, right? At whatever distance is normally blurry, right? You're trying to just trying to read the words gently, not trying too hard in terms of, trying to contract or expand your lenses. But then there is that approach too. I mean, trying to actually bring it into focus the best you can. And this could be some subtle nuances of what you're trying to do, relaxation technique, or an exercise to flex the muscles of your eyes to stretch, or expand or contract the lenses to get it to be clearer, right? Maybe moving in distance and moving back, or maybe looking at the close object and then looking at the far object again, and trying to go back and forth a little bit to stretch your eye lens to get it to used to going back and forth. And that one eye by itself, isolated, right? The weaker eye, or the eye that you're working on, right? Trying to get it to where it can pick up the information, the light, right? It can also be a factor of, are you getting full color? Like you might even notice a difference. Like if you're looking at, something a color, a full object or certain colors, can one eye see the colors brighter or more vividly or in a different shade than the other eye? Do you look at a light bulb and the light bulb looks more white in one eye than the other? The other eye looks a little bit like brownish or tinted, right? That might be a factor. That maybe that's some kind of cataract indicator or something like that for, maybe more, older people might experience something like that more. But at the same time, I think, I've noticed that like one eye might get more of a white, clearer color than the other, right? So that's a factor to come into play. But the main thing I'm really talking about here is the myopathy or nearsightedness, which aren't necessarily, they could be mutually exclusive. Like, you could have myopathy, you could have nearsightedness that is not necessarily true myopathy, right? Which could be other factors besides just the contraction and the expansion of your lens. You might maybe the shape of your eyeball might come into play, and a couple of other factors, right? You're an optometrist or ophthalmologist, you probably understand that much better than I do and have insight on that. For maybe other people here that are listening to this video or happen to listen to this video, right? And you're thinking about, what can I do to help improve my eyesight? But I think these exercises are harmless exercises mostly that, you could do to, like I said, practicing looking at a close object and then a farther object, right? And then doing each eye individually and noticing, hey, am I getting the same level of detail with the other eye? And trying to get your eye to focus on details at those distances better, like it's your weaker eye at that distance, and trying to get your eyes to where they're both, in my case, trying to get my right eye to be able to see farther better and my left eye to be able to see closer better, right? So, and I have experienced times, especially doing some of these exercises, where I'm able to get the clarity to come back a bit more. I'm able to read a bottle that's, 7 feet away from me with my left eye normally, but also with my right eye. If I, kind of do these exercises, it is an instant. I haven't been necessarily doing it that much lately, but I have noticed the improvements when I do it, and even as little as just one session, right? Maybe look at the object for a while by itself. Maybe try to relax your eye into being able to try to read the words on the bottle. Right? Maybe turn the light on. Make sure you have good light more to help you in the beginning, especially, right? You're trying to absorb as much light as you can, but also really trying to, get your lens to focus to where you can see finer detail, right? Now, at first, like I said, it might take some time. Like you might be sitting there thinking, oh, it's just not working. And maybe you're looking at it for 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes or something. It doesn't seem like it's working. But maybe if you sat there for like 15 or 30 minutes and just tried to look around the object you're looking at, right? And try to notice any contour, detail, texture that you can, and try to even, if there's words, maybe try to distinguish them and read them to get your eye into the mindset of like being strong enough to flex and just see at that level easily, right? But that, involves a few potential techniques, right? Like a relaxation technique or a steady, intense trying to focus technique, or looking at objects that are closer and farther, or putting your finger right in front of your face and looking at that, and then looking at the far object, trying to read what's on it. And so that's what I'm doing right here, just to practice. I said maybe even on a table, like you look closely on the table at an object like a coin or something, you put close and you put your eye right there to where you can see it's just a couple of inches away or a few inches away, and trying to get yourself to focus on that. And then a coin at the end of the table and trying to see if you can distinguish the detail, 5 feet away or something like that, right? So this is just a couple of, simple exercises. Now I know there's some books about, fixing your vision and so forth, and there's probably a few other, I know I read one, but I can't remember what it's called, but there was a good book about the subject, and they talk about some exercises that I think, you like putting pressure on the eyeballs and so forth, and maybe those are helpful. I think they could be, in terms of maybe making your eyes more flexible, or just refreshing them in some way. But the main thing I think in this case here is really getting getting rid of the atrophy that comes from being the weaker arm, so to speak, right? Like your left hand is not used to writing, or vice versa, but like I said, the weaker hand is not used to writing. Getting it used to writing, like, is it same thing with your eye, using your weaker eye like as if it was your only eye, and really getting good at, seeing things at a distance and being able to note the details well, and being able to just focus right on it right away pretty well. And I will notice that I get better at that. But like I said, in the beginning, it might take time. You have to look at an object for a while before you start to realize, wait a minute, okay, now I can kind of distinguish those words a little bit better. I can read it, try it a few times, try to get that eye to start focusing in, right? Now, is that going to work for everybody? Certainly, probably not, right? Now, at the same time, I wouldn't give up easily, right? Because it might seem like it's not working. You can't do it, but there's something you might want to try to do daily, right? It's just to try to exercise your eyes. Is it going to totally improve your vision? I wouldn't say, you're probably always going to have that element of one eye being stronger than the other. But if you need your weaker eye to operate more independently, right, like as if it was your only eye, maybe you can improve your vision a little bit, right? Because I have noticed, and even just tonight, like just right now, when I was practicing even before I did this video for a little bit, and noticing the difference, we're looking across the room and then standing next to a doorway where there's the door entryway is right next to my eye, so I can see that and I can try to focus on that real close. But then also looking across the room about 20 feet away, or 10 or 15, 20 feet away, and trying to look at that and make clarity and contour and design and lines and color and be able to see that and pick up on it, and even just get my eye to actually focus in on it to where I can actually see things clearly, right, to some degree, right? And I've noticed it actually do that. But like I said, I might have to sit there for like, maybe 20 minutes practicing back and forth a little bit to where it starts getting to where I can see my eyes trying to focus on this distance that it's normally just totally lazy to, because my brain's picking up a signal from my stronger eye and using that, and like it's a handicap, right? So this is just my suggestion for those of you who have been having vision problems, like with nearsightedness and farsightedness, because it goes both ways, right? Can go both ways. Now, there could be some other factors like cataract or something else that could be causing some cloudiness, but probably as far as blurriness, like if I sit here with my left eye, sure, it doesn't look as good as my right one. I'm sorry, my right eye, when I open my right eye, it doesn't look as good, but if I do kind of focus a bit and practice a bit and try to distinguish detail, I do feel like it does improve a bit to where I can start seeing the detail a bit more clearly. I'm trying to treat this eye as if it is my stronger eye, and at this distance here, like I said, my right eye seems to be the stronger eye for up close, right? I would say stronger, but just better for seeing up close than my left eye, right? So right here, my left eye is having a hard time, getting a good clear imagery, but maybe it's something to do with my brain, right? Picking up on the signal from the eyes. It's not necessarily the eye doesn't work. I'm just not sending a strong enough signal for it to work. I'm depending on my right eye too much for that distance, maybe a bit, right? That could be a factor that I think does come into play. Now, there's certainly probably some other elements, right? Your eyes could be maybe slightly different size or something, but so if I feel like I can improve the vision by exercising it, looking at a farther distance, looking up close, trying to distinguish detail, right? Same thing with the right eye. Right here I can distinguish detail with my right eye up close pretty good, but I can see the screen is blurrier than with my left eye, and that's just 3 or 4 feet difference, right? That's pretty significant. That one eye is better than the other. That each of those, the opposite eye is better than the other for just this short distance, right? Imagine if 20 feet, try that. Then even a longer distance, maybe down the road or something like that, or a tree out the window or something, and close one eye and then close the other and try to see each eye and notice if it's still the same thing, right? And then try some of these exercises where you take your finger or your hand and put it over your eye, or close your eyes, or kind of maybe put it up against the door or the window or something like that, so you can keep your eyelid just gently closed so you're not opening it, and using the weaker eye to try to distinguish as much detail, to try to focus at that distance. Now, another thing I noticed too, an interesting thing, was that my right eye, say it's more nearsighted, right? So I have a hard time seeing at a distance. But when I put my finger right in front of my right eye, and I'll be trying to look in the distance at something distant, but and it might be blurry because it's my right eye. It doesn't see things at a distance as good. Right? But then when I focus in on my finger up close and try to really get my right eye to focus on that well, I'll notice that the stuff in the background even though I can't look directly at it because I'm focusing on my finger, I notice that the stuff in the background on my screen will get clearer. Like, but I can't actually, I'm not able to look right at it because as soon as I do, I'm losing focus. I'm trying to focus on my finger. Now, if I could focus right on the air right here, maybe I could produce the same effect, but I still would be looking theoretically at that one point that's closer to me and not really at the distance. But, like you said, if I get my finger right here or my hand right in front of my eye, about 6 inches to a foot away, about 6 inches, I focus on it, and it's just with the one eye, right? And then I look at the distant object, which I can't see as well with this eye, right? Then try to go back and forth, maybe a little bit, and then try to focus on the weaker, like for in this case, the farther distance is harder for me to see. Try to focusing on that for a while to where, I can be definitely read it. And maybe if I can read it from here, maybe I need to get back a little further to where I can't read it very well. Just enough to where if I could get my eye to focus a little bit better, I'd be able to read it, right? So just a little bit of an improvement, right? Maybe then I need to go back a little bit further even and try a little more of a significant jump to improve my eyes' ability to see at that distance. So it's not easy at first. Like, you're trying to exercise an atrophied muscle is what it feels like. And I even noticed what felt like a little bit of, I don't know, aching or throbbing or something almost in my eyes if it's trying to do something that's just not used to doing. And like, I challenge you to try writing with your weaker arm for a while. It feels really awkward, and you're like at the point where it's like just it feels so weird. Like if you do a bit of it, right? Eventually, you start to get used to doing some of it. Like if I was to write with my left hand, I could write, my name okay, kind of at least legibly, right? And still feel awkward because I don't practice it like very much. It's just something I've done a little bit here and there, enough to develop a little bit of, comfort doing that. But then the same thing with your eyes, right? So and there's a couple of other factors I was going to mention, but like I said, mainly looking at closer and farther objects, right? To flex your eye lens and get it to contract and expand more fluidly. Trying to think of what else I was going to mention about that. But, in the meantime, maybe drop me a line. Let me know if you are nearsighted or farsighted, if you maybe tried this exercise. Now, like I said, there's other things you can maybe do to relieve pressure on your eyes and so forth. They say creating a suction cup with your palms around your eyes and kind of gently pulling them out. Now, this is something I read in some book on vision that I read a long time ago. I can't remember what it was. You might try some stuff like that to maybe exercise your eyes. But also, I think, probably drinking a bit of water daily to keep your body flexible and refreshed. Probably also your kidneys and, different parts of your body in general. But just saying, maybe that could probably, help keep your eyes a little bit more able to flex. But let me know if you try to maybe do this for, like I said, a good amount of time, like at least 20 minutes in one session of just like trying to stare at the same thing that maybe it's a little far and it is blurry to you, but trying to bring it into focus or trying to relax your eye into where all of a sudden you can see a little bit more clarity and focus and detail on that point, wherever that is, whatever distance it is. Maybe let me know if you feel like you are able to notice any improvement from it. And like I said, don't expect it to happen even the first session very much to noticeable effect, right? Like I said, if I take a bottle of like shampoo or something that's at a distance, and this is the case, I have some Gooby Gone adhesive removal sitting right here, right now. My left eye, I can read, it says adhesive. I can read that my left eye. My right eye, I can if I sit here and focus it for a few, right? But not right away. Like I said, it's like as if your lens is doing a slow, like a stiff or something is impeding it and is causing it to take time to focus at that level to where you need to just sit there for a while. Try to distinguish and try to just focus on the one thing that you're trying to read for a few minutes, maybe in a relaxed manner, maybe trying to look around at details around the object, right? Or looking right at the object or the letters that you're looking at and just doing some different, try to, just like there's little subtle techniques you might come up with for trying to get your eye to get into focus. But one of the main things I think it's easy to dismiss is giving it time, right? Just focusing on one point for a little while and trying to really gather as much light information as you can into that eye, while also getting the lens to focus on those distances as much as you can. But like I said, that one thing I was talking about where you focus on something close and the stuff in the distance actually gets clearer. That seems a little counterintuitive to me. I don't know exactly why that is, but it is interesting. But maybe it's because maybe it's still like if I focus on my finger and then I can see the stuff in the background is getting clear, kind of a little clearer. Yeah, I don't know what that is exactly. Maybe if you do try that, let me know if you notice the same thing. Just a thought. But anyway, this is Mike here. Appreciate you listening in. And, the main exercise is looking at different distances with your eyes independently, right? Trying to really develop strength in that weaker eye, right? Trying to write with your weaker arm, if you will, right? To do it daily for a while and understand that it takes patience to really get to the point where you are actually maybe seeing just a little bit better, maybe on average, maybe, strengthening and utilizing your weaker eye, right? That's what I would say is the biggest thing. And getting over the atrophy of depending on only your stronger eye. If I just use my left eye all the time and I'm depending on the information from that, my right eye is not really maybe getting the proper exercise, or you maybe need to open my eye a little wide to get a good amount of light in there and just try to use it more intentionally, right? Use your weak eye more intentionally, like as if it's your only eye, and you need to read a sign in the distance. How can you relax your eye and without squinting as much as you can? Maybe you normally squint or something, but instead just trying to open or relax your eye, to try to reestablish the ability for that weak eye to contract or expand the lens and focus. Alright, so this is Mike here. Thanks for listening to this video. Let me know if it helped you in any way and what your feedback is, or what your personal experience with your vision might be, if you like. Maybe you have pretty good vision, 20/20, perfect vision, etc., and you never really had to deal with this. But for those who have, you might not be noticing how weak, one or both of your eyes actually might be, right? You might not really even understand it because you haven't had nothing to compare. Maybe you haven't been to an eye test for a while, or you didn't really think about it. Maybe you have glasses now and you use them, but maybe it's like it feels impossible to take those glasses off and to try to just see something natural. I know what it's like to have glasses for a little while. You kind of get used to them to the point where, now you are maybe atrophied a bit more because your eyes are so dependent on them. And not saying not to use your glasses, or maybe they can be corrective in some way. I'm not an optometrist. I don't claim to know all the details of how correcting vision can work with maybe glasses. But, I say if you're not using glasses, or you'd like to get better vision without your glasses, maybe there's just really a couple of exercises, one or two exercises I'm talking about here mainly, that I think, really the focus here is to get your lenses kind of working better as they possibly can. Let me know if you try some of these exercises, and like I said, don't maybe give up too easily, right? Let your focus have some time, 20 minutes at a time, sitting there just focusing on one thing, and do a couple sessions of that, come back to it the next day, try to get better at reading of something that's at a certain distance, or maybe try a book and put it at a certain distance and see if you can distinguish, or maybe you can read it as easily with both eyes. Let me know which one is your weaker, which one's your stronger eye. All right, Mikey here signing out. Thanks for listening to this video. You got this far, so you certainly learned me ramble for a bit. So maybe in the meantime, I might have another video possibly suggested here that possibly might be of interest to you. Maybe not, who knows, but certainly appreciate any comments, likes, or shares, or reacts. And maybe you have someone that would benefit from these particular exercises. Certainly, maybe invite them here to listen in. And in the meantime, maybe check out another video, and maybe we'll see you in the next video. All right, have a great one. Talk to you next time. Bye-bye.